Okay, now we go into part two again on Neptune's origins. I'm having to do a redo on this because I had a bit of someone's video on it and it didn't get flagged while I had it in my inventory here waiting for a month and a half, 2 months. But as soon as I went to put it out, it flagged instantly. Here we are looking at that cameo that we looked at before, and you can see that this stone is kind of neat. It's a layered stone, and it has layers of color in it, from a red, rich color to a cinnamon to an orange to a golden to a gray that's real light, and then a background color that's real dark gray. And they had to do all this in bas relief, like we're familiar with the Sumerians and all kinds of people, how they take away the wall and leave the sculpture poking out of the wall, extruded out of the wall, and then the wall has to be done flat like nothing ever happened, and it's all in one piece. So it's quite a bit of workmanship, but when you look at something like this that's roughly only the size of a silver dollar, it's quite intricate and quite an incredible piece of workmanship. You can see how they dug through it to leave the first horse red in each indication, but also the gods and goddesses' hair at the top left and right to have been in that cinnamon blonde color, and again at the bottom too with the boy god and goddess, and so on. What we were looking into is all the different temples that have been listed to Neptune, and there are quite a few of them that have actually gotten taken over time and turned into Christian temples and such, and other ones got destroyed and left alone. And a few of them have been misidentified, but we've looked at a few of them here recently, and we were going down through this when we were, and we showed that Agrippa and the Basilica of Neptune located at Campus Martius and so on. But apart from that, there's also a sanctuary to Neptune between the Palatine and Aventine hills where a stream once flowed, and this may be referenced to his role as a freshwater god. More generally speaking, Neptune was the natural god for seafarers to pray to, as they believed that he would grant them safe voyage across the seas. But you can go down a sea right out into the ocean, and it continues. And if there was a god controlling the waters, he would also control the seas. And the seas would connect to a greater ocean that goes around our entire planet. And so whenever they had these tales of Neptune and how he can, well, like in the children's movies that were put out recently, where anywhere there's water, he can show up instantly. He's there. He's part of it. His essence is water. But Neptune, as you said earlier, its origins come from a word which basically meant wet in the first place. Down to the water, to the wet, to the lake, whichever way you want to use it, but the word comes out to being wet. And so it's easy to understand that he was a river god that got deified and taken into a pantheon and taken to mean the whole sea once they realized the breadth of what it all contained. There are many river gods in the Greeks, subtle names here and there, nymphs and river gods in this area and that area. For the Nile wasn't even named the Nile in the first place. Nilus is a river god of the Greeks, having to do with Egyptus and how they were brothers and everything like that. And their original name for the river was the river R. Right. So it's easy to see, though, that seafarers, pirates, and all of that would have a deep connection to Neptune and its stories, right? And Davy Jones lockers and all the things that go with this. Here we're looking at a painting of one of these people during this time era that I'm talking about. You can see how he struggled down his beard a little bit, combed down, and his depiction here is of Poseidon. This is kind of a famous painting here, and this is a painting of Andrea Doria as the Neptune by Angelo Baronzino, arguably the most famous example of a seafarer portrait as the god of the sea. So there was a lot of this going on where seafarers were having their own portraits done in such manner. Not so much always as a swashbuckler and things along that line. In the end, Neptune's influence was greater than Poseidon's, though. So we just talked about how he didn't have that great of influence coming into it, but due to the pantheon, the way it was built, he ended up coming out to be one of the greater ones. For actually, there are versions of him in every single religion that goes on, and by doing so, it was very strong. Something that couldn't be denied and something that got incorporated every single time. Imagine that. The one that didn't disappear. Right. It got to cling on. Other people, and even what we talked about sun gods and their names and so on like that, and how those get pushed over time, but it's the same guy and the same thing. The Neptune Poseidon connection is one that didn't get really ruined from earliest times. Although it has connections with a god of grain, god of horses, which seems to make no sense with water, but we've gotten into that and we'll do so a little bit more. While Neptune was not significant a god to the Romans as Poseidon necessarily was to the Greeks, the former's legacy was felt in Western culture even to this day. For instance, Neptune is still associated with the sea and commonly regarded as its personification. For instance, Thomas Fuller, an English physician who lived during the 17th or 18th century AD, has said that Bacchus hath drowned more men than Neptune in his Nomogolia, a collection of proverbs. And I guess we're saying Bacchus is the god of wine, so wine has drowned more men than the ocean. Would be a more correct or modern day way to say it. Well, still that seems old school too. There's Aphrodite. Neptune also became synonymous with the seafarers who sometimes depicted this ancient god. A portrait of Andrea Doria's Neptune by Angelo Bronzino is arguably the most famous example of a seafarer portrayed as Neptune, as we said. Moreover, in 1846, a new planet, the eighth one from the sun, was discovered. Although the name Janus of the Greeks and Oceanus were proposed, it was eventually called Neptune. They say this was due to the planet's bluish color and that the tend to naming heavenly bodies after figures from classical mythology. In the case of the planets, it's clear that they are named after the Roman gods rather than their Greek counterparts. Whenever I studied in school, of course, they put them together and they wanted you to learn both of them at the same time, and Hermes and Mercury is the messenger and so on, how it goes through. But you always notice that you had this one that you know is a Greek god and the next one's a planet. Well, it was just their god, but we know of it as their planets. All people worshiped them as that planet in that case. And I've showed in a recent video too how Neptune, which is supposedly invisible to the naked eye, really isn't. It can be seen, but you have to know where it would be. And whenever it goes through its phases of a half moon, quarter moon to almost nothing, you really can't see it. Only when it's around its full moonish phase facing us looking does it actually give off enough light for you to see, and it just looks like a little dot moving, and it's very bluish, so not standing out and not as bright. But the ancient knew this too. They had that. And Neptune goes with Enki and so many other things, and water gods. So in short, Neptune is a figure from ancient times who still has relevance in today's world. From his origins as a god of fresh water, he was transformed into the god of all the seas through his association with Poseidon. Whilst this Greek counterpart faded away in history, remaining largely in the realm of mythology, Neptune's legacy continued in the centuries that followed. Even today, his influence can be felt in various areas, including language, art, and astronomy. But deeper than that, if anybody was to start asking you, what's the God of this, or what's a God of that, or what is a God of this, it'd be hard to answer in a lot of cases. But whenever we have simplish things like, who's the God of the ocean, most anyone can name that. Because of my enamorance with the sea and the ocean and corals and fish, and the fact that under this blanket of blue there's all this world that lives there that, hell, nobody really knew. It might as well be on another planet. And that's what got me really interested in it. And I find that still, no matter what I do, I find myself connected in some way to this ocean and Neptune and so on. And so that's the reason that I've named myself such, because it seems to go along far too much with what's going on. My other channel had me as chrysalis, and that's basically what a butterfly goes in before it merges out as a butterfly from a caterpillar. And that had significance for it too also. That channel was looking into a little bit more of religion and just a few of the things that I've discussed in this channel. And we'll continue and go from here. This is just one layer of the onion, and we've just now gotten to it. But there's a few layers to this that goes on, and it shows its earliest roots too. And I'll get to that in another upcoming video shortly. Sadly, I have to cut out the other part where a man was validating what I was about to say, and we'll try to put that in another format in the other video. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. Add what you can down in the comments. Peace.